Welcome to the NCT Data Science Seminar. This event is jointly hosted by Heidelberg AI. We cordially welcome Vishal Patel from Johns Hopkins University, our speaker today, and Annika Reinke from the Division of Intelligent Medical Systems at DKFZ as the host of this seminar. Annika, the stage is yours.
Thank you so much, Doreen, and much welcome, Vishal Patel. Thanks a lot for being here. It's a pleasure to have you. You will be talking about the important topic of understanding and mitigating data replication in medical synthetic imaging.
Regarding this generative AI methods, in particular diffusion models, I will present some results, and then I'll discuss some important issues and how to mitigate them. But before I get into the main part of my talk, let me just briefly give you a high-level overview of some of the things that we work on in my lab at Johns Hopkins University. So I'm the PI of a Vision and Image Understanding Lab, and we have a pretty large group with almost 21 PhD students. And we work in a number of different areas, mainly in computer vision and image machine learning. And some of the application areas that we focus on are medical imaging as well as biometrics and remote sensing. So regarding medical imaging applications, we've been working on a number of different topics. And another important sort of topic is the adaptation, right? So you train an algorithm on one particular distribution, and when you test it, there is sort of a dataset bias. How do you deal with that? It's a very important problem in medical imaging application, especially when you have this point of care application. And depending on, if you just look at this ultrasound example, depending on the probe, like how the whoever is operating, the amount of pressure you apply, the angle in which you apply this, you hold the probe. Depending on that, the image quality will change, and that basically introduces a different distribution. And as a result, you often see a degradation in the performance. So one of the ideas that we developed was deal with this distribution during testing. So we came up with this notion of on-the-fly test time domain adaptation, which we presented in MIDO last year. So we have been working on a variety of different topics. But with that, let me get into the main part of the talk, which is generative AI for medical imaging application. So as we know that in the last 5 years, we've seen a number of different generative AI techniques, which are now able to produce images and videos of very high quality. And here are some examples of images which are generated by an AI algorithm, latent diffusion, for instance. And when you look at these images, they're amazing, very good quality images, and something that even humans cannot, produce, if you were to do that by hand. And the algorithm can easily just produce this. And this is just some examples. And similarly, you can also produce a very high quality videos. So this generative AI is a very important field recently. And if you look at the literature, there have been a very fundamental approaches, starting from generative adversarial networks to variational autoencoders to flow, and very recently diffusion models. And in all of these approaches, the idea is very simple. The idea is the following. So you're given a data set, and this could be a data set of images or videos or whatever that you're trying to sort of mimic, right? So the idea is that you have a data set, you have one of these, think of this as a black box, which takes these images and sort of does some sort of training. And at the end, once the network is trained, you sort of feed in a random noise, and it will produce an image as if that image came from the distribution that you started with. In other words, it will take the noise as an input, and it will produce an image that looks very similar to the images that you have in your training set. And that is basically what most of this, pretty much all of these methods do in different ways. And in particular, this notion of diffusion models that was introduced very recently, a few years ago, 3-4 years ago, that has gained a lot of traction when it comes to generative AI. And just to review how a diffusion model works, unlike other generative methods, diffusion models operate in a very different way. They have sort of two steps. One is the forward step, and the other one is a reverse process. So in the forward process, what happens is that you start with an image and you slowly add some noise according to some variance schedule. And you keep on adding noise, and at the end, you basically get sort of a noisy observation. That's basically like a noise. There is nothing in the image but the noise. And that's the forward process. And in the reverse process, you take this noise as the input, and you slowly remove some noise, slowly one at a time, in one step at a time. And this reverse process is basically modeled by a neural network. In other words, it takes a noisy image as the input, and it will sort of remove some noise. And then you sort of repeat this process. And this is done with the help of a neural network. And once you're able to do this, now you have a generative model, which basically can take any sort of noisy image as input, and you can basically apply this reverse process, and it will basically generate a novel image. And you can basically do this. And this is sort of the idea of diffusion models. And you have a conditional version of this as well. In other words, you can put some condition, like generate an image with of a person with open mouth, or generate an image with a black hair or brown hair, and so on and so forth. So you can also come up with a conditional version of this process. So what we have done is we wanted to sort of understand what are the implications, and how can we sort of leverage the latest generative AI methods and address some of the challenges in medical imaging. And in particular, when it comes to medical image applications, one of the problems that we are faced with is that we just don't have enough data set. And as we know, that collecting data, annotating them, and is very expensive and time consuming. And on top of that, we have to deal with these privacy issues. So the idea is that, can we leverage one of these generative AI technologies, in particular diffusion models, and be able to sort of synthesize or generate realistic looking images, which can then be used to improve your segmentation algorithm or classification algorithm, whatever you're dealing with. So what we have done is we've sort of these are the images from a data set that has, inside the GI tract. And essentially, we've trained a diffusion model with only 30 images. So the data set has only 30 images. And then we've trained a diffusion model. And then we've also synthesized some, sort of synthetic images. So in this slide, I have a collection of both real and synthetic images. And when you look at them, it's very hard. It's very difficult for you to be able to determine which one is real, which one is synthetic, right? And you may be able to sort of figure that out if you stare at these images for some time. But when you just look at them, they're very good quality images, and you don't know which one is which. So if you look at these images very closely, you can see that this on the left are the synthetic images, and the one on the right are the realistic images. And similarly, when it comes to this sort of nuclei segmentation problem, right? These are the images that we have, and we can also synthesize, high quality images. And if I give you a mixture of both real and synthetic images, it's going to be very difficult for you to determine which one is which, right? But when you look at it very carefully, maybe you can figure out that, these are the synthetic and these are the real. So why is synthetic data generation important medical imaging, right? And as I mentioned before, that we when it comes to medical imaging and also many other fields like biometrics, we have to ensure the privacy of the patients, of the user, right? And when it comes to medical imaging data, compared to the general computer vision data sets, we just cannot collect them, annotate them, and release them publicly available. We cannot make them publicly available, right? So privacy is a very important issue, and that is the bottleneck. And that is one of the reasons why we don't really see a lot of data which are publicly available compared to many computer vision data sets. And in many cases, we have very few data sets, like 30 images or 10 images, or maybe 100 images. And that's nowhere near what we see in other domains, such as, computer vision, like where we have thousands or millions or even billions of images. Sometimes the images that we collect are very imbalanced, and we have to be able to balance that somehow. And also, we want to be able to sort of come up with a way in which we not only just collect them, but also annotate them. For instance, you have this image in the middle. You see all these little blobs, which need to be segmented manually. And you can see that even just for a single image, you might be looking at hundreds or thousands of those blobs. And just annotating, one image can even take hours or days, right? If you want to carefully segment them. So these are some of the problems. And the question that we are asking is that, can generative AI provide us with a way to deal with some of these issues, if not all of them, right? And this is exactly what we were sort of trying to address. So what we did was we wanted to come up with a mechanism in which we take these publicly available data sets and come up with a diffusion-based model, which not only generates the novel images, but also the corresponding mask around the region of interest. So many of these data sets are segmentation data sets, and they come with both the images as well as the ground truth masks. And these are basically generated by some humans, and they manually sit down and sort of they generate the mask corresponding to the images. So we took these data sets and we trained a diffusion model. And with that, we are now able to sort of generate the images and the corresponding masks simultaneously. And the good thing about this algorithm is that we now have a mechanism which can not only just generate the images, but also the masks. So you don't really have to manually annotate these images. Now, these masks may not be exact, it may not capture the exact regions in the images that are of interest, but nevertheless, it captures sort of most of the area of interest. And what you will see is that with the help of the synthetic images as well as the masks, we ran some experiments on a variety of different data sets, and we showed that when you use this synthetic data, you improve the performance significantly, right? So if we can do such thing, then this can really solve a lot of our problems in medical imaging, especially when it comes to segmentation. So let me just give you some results, and then I'll come back to some of the issues that we were faced with. So this is these are the images in the data set. So these are the real images that we use to train a diffusion model. So you can see that you have the image and corresponding the mask, and you can see that it's a very difficult problem, to segment, to annotate these images. All these blobs must be annotated by a human, right? And it's just a very difficult problem, and that's the reason why we have very few number of samples in these data sets. Even 30 images probably will involve hundreds of hours of work, human labor, right? So we take these images with the corresponding masks, we train the model, and these are the these are the types of images and the masks that we can generate. And as you can see, that some of the images are very good quality images, and they match the distribution that we start with. In other words, these generated images, they look very similar to the images that we have in our training set. And also, if you look at very closely, they also capture the segmentations, right? The regions which need to be segmented very well. In some cases, the segmentation masks are not as good, but in many other cases, they're very good. And from 30 images, we can now generate thousands and thousands of such images. So we've enlarged the set from 30 to 1,000. And once we are able to do that, we can now go back to our segmentation algorithm and retrain the model with these synthetic images and the corresponding labels, the segmentation masks that we have. And what we saw is very interesting. So here is just a simple experiment that we conducted, where we took the famous UNet architecture and we trained the UNet on this data set that we're dealing with, where we use only 10% of the real images. And we basically looked at what the corresponding segmentation is, and we are about 68.4%. Then we enlarged the training set by adding, only 10% of the real images, and then about 100% of the synthetically generated images. So we enlarged the training set. So remember, in the synthetic data, we not only have the images, but also the corresponding masks. And as soon as you enlarge the training set, you see a significant boost in the performance. And then you sort of play this, and then now we increase the number of training samples to 50%, the real samples, and we sort of see the increase in performance. And then we also add some synthetic data. We sort of see a boost there as well. So basically, what I want to convey here is that when you synthetically generate images and the corresponding masks, and if you enlarge your training set with the generated data, then you can significantly boost the performance, right? I mean, here is an example where 75.6 to almost 78, and that's a pretty decent boost by just including this synthetic data into the training process. And similarly, we've done multiple experiments on a variety of different data sets. So here is another set of experiments where we dealt with this GI tract images, where we have these images and the corresponding masks. And as you can see that these are the real images, about 880 in the data set. And the way these images are annotated are basically the humans, they don't really sort of annotate every pixel, but they just sort of draw or put some landmarks around the object. And you can see that the algorithm sort of completes those that region. So you have those these lines that connect the dots. So it may not be a very good sort of segmentation, but nevertheless, this is the ground truth that is provided in the data set. So we take these images and the corresponding masks, and we train the diffusion model, and now these are the images that we can produce. So these are all synthetic images and the corresponding masks. The interesting thing about our generation is that we can really see very nice contour. The segmentation is better actually than what the humans actually annotated, because these were only a few dots and a line that connects the two dots. Whereas here, the AI algorithm sort of captures the boundary reasonably well, right? And similarly, we sort of use the real data with the synthetic data, and we showed that we can really boost the performance significantly, right? Unlike here, the boost is not that significant, but still it's pretty decent. And I will get back to this point in a few minutes. And finally, this is another data set that we dealt with. And here also, this is sort of the, a data set where you have different types of sort of, tumors or things, molds or what have you on the skin, and images and the corresponding masks. And these are the generated images by our algorithm. And when you look at them, this is very significant. I mean, you just cannot tell the difference. I mean, you have this, sort of image and the corresponding masks. And when you use them, you really improve the performance significantly, right? So these are the results. These are some of the experiments that we conducted on images, on different types of medical image segmentation data sets. And we've also done some work with videos. As I mentioned before, that these generative AI methods are not able to not only deal with images, but they can also produce very high quality videos. And I want to give you an example on one of the projects that we're working with the Wilmar Eye Institute. So we're trying to study nystagmus, and it's a condition where the eyes, move very rapidly in a very uncontrollable manner. So the patients cannot control how the eyes move, but they just move in a very random manner. And this is a very important problem, and one of the most difficult things here is the data set. We just cannot use the patient data set because of many issues regarding the privacy, and even whatever we could find out there is very small, and it's just a difficult problem to deal with. So what we've done is we have some a data set internally at Johns Hopkins, and we took these eye videos, and we wanted to come up with a mechanism in which we can generate novel nystagmus eye movement videos. And when you look at the literature, this is a very well studied problem, and you know there are different types of eye movements, and they sort of follow some sort of waveforms. So we know exactly how the eyes move, and if you can sort of put we can track the pupil, how the eye moves based on some sort of a waveform, then we can come up with a very interesting video generation model, which takes these sort of waveforms with this sort of location of the eye, which can be fed into the video generation model, and it will generate the video corresponding to the eye movements. And with that, we can now generate very high quality videos. And here are some examples. So these are all generated by a diffusion-based video synthesis model. And you can see that these are all very realistic looking videos. And once we're able to synthesize this, we have used this for classification, and we've shown that it improves the performance. So with these experiments, what I want to convey is that generative AI can be very useful technology for medical imaging applications, especially in the cases when you're dealing with privacy and small data and what have you. But with all of this, there is one fundamental thing that is often overlooked, and that is something that we don't really see people discussing. Some of you might have heard of this, and this is a problem that we often see with pretty much most of the generative AI technologies, in particular with diffusion models. And that is the problem of data replication. So what I have here is something that I did with one of my students on biometrics, on facial recognition problems. So, these diffusion models can be used to synthesize novel face images. And this is something that we observed. So we took this FFHQ is a face recognition data set. It's just a large data set. We took 300 images, and we basically trained an unconditional diffusion model, and then we started synthesizing. We synthesized, let's say 300 images, and then what we saw was that if you have, so in the top row is basically what the algorithm has generated. And then we wanted to sort of see what is the closest match that you can find of that image in your training set. So we wanted to compare that generated image with the images that we have in the training set. And these are the images that we obtained. So these are the retrieved images from the training set. So what you see is that the generated image and what you see in the training set, they are exact matches, right? At least the top match. And then you can see even the bottom two there is some similarities, like, maybe the hair is gray, white or gray, what have you. And, there's a mustache and things like that. And this happened even when we increased the number of training samples to train the generative, diffusion model. And this is a problem. So now we have a dilemma. On one hand, we are saying that we are able to generate very high quality images and videos, but on the other hand, they're not actually training, they're not actually learning, they're not actually generating something novel, but rather they're replicating. They're basically replicating the training samples. So are they really generating anything new? And this is a big problem. And not only data replication is a problem in diffusion models, but what we have found, especially in the biometrics problems, in particular face generative models, is that we generated images using diffusion models where we use, let's say 300 images where 150 are male, 150 are female. So it's a very well-balanced data set. And we generate another set of, let's say, 300 images. And we wanted to see whether a diffusion model generates a biased output or not. In other words, whether it generates more female subjects versus male subjects and things like that. So we indeed found that diffusion models generate biased outputs. In some cases, it was biased, towards the male subjects. In some cases, it was female, and so on and so forth. So not only they suffer from data replication, but they also produce biased outputs. And that is something that we have highlighted in this paper last year. When it comes to videos, it's exactly same problem. And it's, in fact, it's amplified by, even multiple things. So here we deal with data replication and the bias in terms of gender, maybe ethnicity, hair color, what have you. But here, when it comes to videos, you have a completely new dimension of time. So now what we saw was that we went back to the publicly available diffusion models, video generative models. And there are a couple of problems that we found. One was that many of these models, they did not release their a model for various reasons, but they had the websites where they had sort of published the generated videos. So we took those videos, and from their paper, we know that they what data set they used to train the model. And what we did was basically we looked at the generated video frames or videos, and we wanted to sort of find the closest matches in the training set, and we found exact replication. So here an example. Here is a slide where we have 3 state-of-the-art unconditional video generative models, and what you see is that the generated videos, they match exactly with what we have in the training videos. It's not only frame by frame replication, but we've also found motion replication. So it also replicates the motion. So there are so many papers that have come out in recent years that say that we have amazing quality videos that we can generate with our diffusion-based model, but none of the methods that discuss this issue of data replication. Of course, if you're able to generate, if you're able to replicate your videos from your training set, then whatever metric that you're using, whether it's FID score or inception score, what have you, it's going to be good because it's the exact replication. It matches the distribution. Remember, this generative AI methods are distribution learning methods. In other words, once trained from noise, they produce data samples as if that generated image came from the distribution that you started with. So if you have generated some images and you want to compare how well it matches with your training distribution, if it's the exact same replication, then your FID score, your inception score is going to be very good. So that's another problem with many of these papers where they just go by FID or inception scores. So these are some of the issues that we found. And this is a big problem. And we are dealing with these general computer vision problems, but what are the implications for this in terms of medical imaging applications? So I presented you with multiple applications where we can use these diffusion models to not just generate images, but also the corresponding masks. But now I have a contradiction that basically says that, well, are we really learning? So all these examples that I presented, is it really novel? Are these novel images and the corresponding masks, or is this just a replication of what we see in the training set? So I must say that in this unconditional generation, replication is significant, in particular when you're dealing with small sample sizes. So when you have your data set that you're using to train the diffusion model is relatively small, then it will almost certainly replicate data rather than generating novel samples. And that is something not just us, but many researchers have found. So this is a problem. I mean, you must have seen in the news that, the New York Times have sued the inventors of ChatGPT-4, right? And they found the same issue. What they've done is that, New York Times did multiple experiments, and they showed that there are at least 100 examples where with a particular prompt, whatever ChatGPT generated, and they compared that with what New York Times had said about that particular topic, and it's exact match. I mean, you see them. It's a word-to-word compared, like it's basically a copy. It's a replication. So this data replication is something very important that has been overlooked, and I think it's something that we must address if we were to go after generative AI. methods, especially in medical imaging. So to study that in the context of medical imaging, we did a very thorough evaluation and study of a variety of different modalities for medical imaging applications. So what we did was we took these diffusion models, and for instance, here is an example where we characterized what do we mean by data replication when it comes to medical imaging. And we know that there is some sort of replication. Then how do we address this problem? How do we mitigate that problem? So when it comes to the data replication, especially in medical imaging, there are multiple ways we can address. One could be its exact replication, meaning that whatever the training set that you started with, the generated image is exactly the same as one of your training images. And there are cases where we've seen partial mitigation, where maybe the structure that you see at the top of this image is very similar, but the remaining part is very different. So we see sort of the partial sort of replication. And then there are cases where it's completely novel synthesis. And those are the examples that we want to go after, right? So how do we characterize these types of images when it comes to medical imaging? And then if we know that these are the images which are sort of replicated, can we come up with a mechanism in which we can sort of remove those? In other words, come up with a way in which we don't really use these replicated images or images which are not useful to us in terms of improving the segmentation. So to do that, we came up with this notion of a replication score. And we looked at three different modalities, the X-ray, the CT, and ultrasound. And these are basically some of the images which are generated by our algorithm. So on the left are the real images, on the right are very high quality generated images. They may not be realistic, but they look pretty reasonable, and they're sort of high quality images. So the question is, if I have this real images, and if I have this generated image, I want to sort of compare whether this generated image is indeed a novel, a realistic image, or whether it's sort of replicating, or even a partial replication. So what I have to do is I have to come up with a mechanism to do that. So what we do is that we have this generated image, we call it the reference image, and we have a training set that is used to generate that image using with the help of a diffusion model. By the way, I must say that I've been discussing these issues regarding diffusion models, but these issues are also true for many of the other generative models. For instance, generative adversarial networks, GANs, also have these issues. But diffusion models, they amplify this compared to generative adversarial networks. But anyway, so we have this training set. We generate this novel sample. What we do is we come up with a way to characterize how similar this generated image is compared to your training set. And what we do is we basically use a pre-trained model to extract some features from this generated as well as the training set. And then we do so-called the cosine similarity. It's basically the inner product of the two vectors. So generated vector, you want to compare that with your training sample. And so you want to see how well that correlates with your training sample. And we basically view that as a replication score. And that replication score basically has a lot of information about what kind of images are produced by the diffusion model. So here are some examples where the images are not replicated, right? So you have these are the real images, and these are the top 3 retrieved images from the training set. So these are the synthetic images, and you can see that there is no correspondence. They look very different, and as a result, this replication score is below, let's say, 0.5, right? It's smaller than 0.5 or around 0.5. On the other hand, when there is some sort of replication happening, you see that these are the real images and these are the top retrieved images, synthetic images. And you can see that there is some sort of, trend which is common in all of these images. Maybe, there is a slight similarity in this region here, maybe, or there is this part that matches, and all that. And as a result, when you look at the replication score, that is around, more than 60% perhaps. And similarly here, you can see that when you look at all these images, the shape of these organs is very similar. Not only that, but also this texture that you see in these objects. Right? Maybe it's a red here and black here and so on and so forth, but it's very similar. And as a result, that is translated very well into this replication score. And similarly, when it comes to the X-ray, you can see that these are very similar looking images and the corresponding replication score. And these are some more examples, right? Where you have ultrasound image and these are replicated and you can see it's exact replication. And when you have very exact replication, this score is very high, very close to 1, right? So this is basically what the score that is basically looking at the correlation between the generated image with your training set captures. So now with this, we can basically do a very detailed analysis of our data set, and we can see, okay, when we include a study where we vary the replications, so we generate images, we fix the threshold based on the replication score, let's say 0.3, then 0.5, 0.6, 0.7, 0.8, and then we look at the area under the curve, the ROC curve, and see how that sort of varies for different replication scores. And what we've seen is that when you go beyond 0.6, there is not much happening in pretty much all of these studies that we've conducted on 3 different data sets. So what that means is that, remember, beyond 0.6 means that it's all about replication. That's basically what we see here, right? If it's a lower than 0.6, 0.5, it's very different types of images that the algorithm produces. So this sort of also says that, if you can somehow reject or remove the images which are beyond 0.6 threshold, then you can basically remove replicated samples and also deal with this privacy issue, because these images which are generated, they're exactly the same as the training images, and they have these implications in terms of privacy of the patients, right? So don't include images with the score which is higher than, let's say, 0.6 in your training set. And when we do that, we indeed, improve the performance. So what we've done is here, we have the real images, and these are the performance across different data sets. Then we have real and synthetic data. And you can see pretty much in all the cases, we see slight improvement. And then we have real plus synthetic, but now we remove, meaning that we come up with a threshold, let's say 0.6, and keep only sort of novel images, not the replicated images, in the data set. And we can see that it's actually performing on par or even better at times, pretty much, what we see with the synthetic data. So meaning that these replicated samples or samples which are very close to your training set, if you have them, if the generative AI algorithm generates them, and if you include them in your training set, that won't really help you much. So it's better to sort of threshold them and figure out a way to remove them. And we have a mechanism that allows us to do that. And here's sort of the a plot that shows, a distribution. So this is where most of the images are centered, and these are the novel samples. There is a sort of a region where the replication happens, and there is a significant region beyond, let's say 0.75 to 1, where it's exact replication. So the idea is to basically come up with a threshold and not include, images beyond certain threshold in your training set. And that way you can not only mitigate the data replication, but also you can deal with the privacy issues in medical imaging. And this is just a, one way, very easy and simplest way you can deal with this problem. In a very recent study, this is not regarding medical imaging, but just again, with general computer vision problems, we came up with a sort of a reward-based approach. And this is something that we see with large language models, where you have this reinforcement learning type of algorithm, where you can come up with a reward function that maximizes, that you can use along with your diffusion sort of loss function, so that now you can generate images which are not biased. generate data samples which do not replicate, and so on and so forth. So what you see here is if you just apply diffusion model, this red box basically shows that how biased the output is. It produces a lot more female subjects than the male subjects. And when you apply this reward maximization-based diffusion model, it balances out the gender, and it will basically, generate almost like a 50-50. So 50% of the images are female subjects and 50% of the images are male subject. And we have also shown that the same mechanism can be applied to deal with the data replication. And also we've come up with a linear combination of the two, where we can have only one reward function that can deal with data replication as well as bias problem in diffusion models. Very recently, I know we're running out of time, so I'm pretty much at the end of my talk, but literally a couple of days ago, in fact, yesterday, the day before yesterday, this paper came out, which also looks at the exact same problem that I just presented today. It basically studies the data replication problem in medical imaging. And basically they said exactly what I just said. They looked at CT, MR, and X-ray, and they said that diffusion models, unconditional diffusion models, they basically memorize the data up to 41%, almost 20%, and about 33% for CT, MRI, and X-ray. And here are some of the exact images that they've shown in their paper, where the training images and the generated images, they're exact replication, right? And here are some more examples where you have, generated images and the real images are the replication. So basically, what I wanted to convey here is that don't just blindly, I'm at the conclusion because I'm running out of time. So don't just blindly use these generative AI algorithms for whatever application that you're dealing with, because they may have some implications, especially in biometrics and medical imaging problems where you're dealing with human, data, human subject data. These privacy issues are very, very important. And you have to deal with this, data replication and bias problems in generative AI. And if you look at the literature, there are a few papers, including the one that I just showed you, that sort of highlight the issues with these diffusion-based generative models, but they don't really propose any mitigation strategies. So when it comes to mitigation, it's a completely open problem. And for those of you who are interested in this problem, I think that's something that you can certainly work on. And it can have a lot of implications beyond just medical imaging, okay? And finally, I just want to sort of acknowledge my students who worked on the problems that I just presented, the algorithms that I presented. And here is the website where we often put, the papers, the code, the data sets, and I invite you to sort of visit our website. And, I'll basically stop here and take any questions if you have any. Thank you.
Thank you so much for this talk. This was really interesting. And we already have a few questions. Let's start with the chat first. But if you have any other question, please raise your hand or write it in the chat, whatever more convenient to you. So first question, how does generative AI algorithm adapt to different image video requirements or analysis? So, or do we have to retrain it every time with new data sets?
Right, exactly. Yeah, so it's data specific. So if you are dealing with X-ray, you have a data set of X-ray images and you train the diffusion model and it will only synthesize, X-ray images. And then if you're dealing with MR, then you have to retrain a model to do that. So usually it's a data specific. Now, there are ways in which you can do sort of a conditional generation. So if you can come up with a condition that says that, okay, I'm dealing with an image, a brain image, ultrasound image with 2 tumors. So if you have a text that describes that you're dealing with MR, then it will generate the MR image. But that is very extensive, and that might be sort of a bit involved. Nevertheless, you can do multiple modality synthesis with the guidance of text or some sort of additional condition. But for the most part, for the results that are presented, it's only based on one type of data set.
All right, thank you. Perhaps Lena, let's continue with you.
Yeah, many thanks for your talk. We're working also with diffusion models on, let's say, similar data sets. And I was wondering, a question on their first part. Have you ever used heavy data augmentation as a baseline?
Right, very good. Yes, so that's a good point. See, the issue with the augmentation, right? So the augmentation is proposed to deal with the scarcity of data, and also there is a bit sense of robustness when it comes to augmentations, right? But at the same time, when you apply the augmentations, the anatomy, right, and the structure, the quality of the generated images, they don't really improve much. And even in that case, we also see replication happening. So for instance, we have these 30 images in one of the data sets. You can apply various augmentations, like a little bit of flipping, rotation, and what have you. But it's the same image and you're rotating. So when it comes to the generation, it really doesn't help much. It will basically generate the rotated image, but at the same time, it is still replicating that rotation that is happening. So those augmentations, right, are helping enlarge your training set, but the replication is still happening. So the images which are generated will be rotated, and so on and so forth. So whatever augmentation that you apply in your training set, you will see that in the generated image. So we still haven't addressed the problem of data replication with augmentations. I mean,
well, yeah, I see your point. On the other hand, you could argue with generative AI, you also only get the distribution of your training data as you have kind of an augmentation. But have you looked into this? Or,
yeah, sure.
But
yeah.
You cannot give me numbers on where you stand, basically. Probably not on the top of your head, but I was so you would say, you would really make the point that rather than investigating in, let's say, smart augmentation, it really is worth going along the lines of generative AI, which you could see as a kind of data augmentation anyway, right?
Exactly, right? Yeah, because at the end, right, these are distribution learning models, right? So whatever data, whether it's augmented data, what have you, your generative AI algorithm will learn that distribution, right? So if you're really interested in generating novel samples, then generative AI might be the solution, right? And of course, maybe you can have a combination of the two. You can have a data augmentation before doing synthesis, and maybe it will help you generate, samples which are slightly better than without augmentation, right? But in my opinion, and I think it's not just us who are basically going after synthetic data, but when you look at the literature, in fact, just yesterday, I read a paper that basically went back to, we know about the CLIP model, which is the vision plus language model. They went back to the CLIP training, and they trained the CLIP model with completely synthetic data. And basically, they showed that you don't even need real, data set. If you just train a CLIP model with synthetic, high quality synthetic data, multimodal data set, then you basically get a performance which is as good as the original CLIP, which was trained on the real data, or even better. So I think, the field is really moving towards, generative AI, and in particular, high quality data generation. And in fact, this is something that you will see a lot that will, have a lot of impact, not just in, in just computer vision, but biometrics, and especially in medical imaging field. So I think it's a very interesting area to really go after. And there are many open problems in that area. Yeah.
We have a bunch more questions in the chat. So the next one is basically two questions. Let's start with the first one. Given small-scale biometric data sets, how can you ensure that the synthetic data is in distribution with the real data beyond just visual inspection?
Yeah, that's a good question. So we basically, so you have a data set, you train a generative model, then once the training is done, you synthesize, let's say, your training set has 300 images, you synthesize 300 images, so the number of samples are the same. Now you take a VGG, a pre-trained model, you extract features, and you basically capture the similarity, like correlation, like cosine similarity, for instance, and that will tell you how similar the images are. So there are very many ways you can compare such things, right? And that's exactly what we do in biometrics. We do that all the time.
And based on that, investigating the synthetic data distribution, are there methods to ensure that no shortcuts or confounding factors are learned, which would severely impact the prediction task or downstream task robustness?
So the interesting thing is that, and that's something also highlighted, when we look at the generated images, sometimes it's not exact replication. It may be, replicates, let's say, part of the image, and the background or maybe the other half of the image is slightly different. So in that case, you have somewhat sort of replication happening, but it's a partial replication, right? Maybe you'll have the shoes, the shape of the shoe is exactly the same, but maybe the color might be different. So it's a bit hard to characterize, but when you extract, let's say, the feature, when you generate images, and when you extract features from a pre-trained a network, and if you sort of correlate them with your training set, based on our experiments and based on what I've presented, we found that score, the cosine similarity, is able to even capture those partial replications as well. And if you remember, like the paper that just came out a couple of days ago on Archive, they do very similar study, but instead of a cosine similarity, they basically rely on a sort of a triplet, sort of self-supervised learning mechanism to extract features, to compare, whether a generated image is very close to the training set or not. So basically, to answer your question, you can capture whether there is a partial replication or not, but this will really depend on the downstream task. If the downstream task is a gender recognition, then just changing some of the attributes like the hair color may, or maybe the shape of the face, or maybe the background may have a lot of implications on gender and things like that, right? So it's really hard to sort of, answer your question, but it really depends on the downstream application and downstream task that you're dealing with.
All right, thank you.
Right.
Let's go on. In a similar vein, is it possible that a generative model could generate images that look good to the human eye, perform well relative metrics loss, but still have some quality issues that can cause issues when you're using them to train? By
Very
problems, I'd referred more to performance issues than bad metrics scores for the downstream model.
Very good question, and thank you for the question. So we did a human-based evaluation. So one of the things that is ongoing right now with the study that I presented here is that we have taken our generated images and we have shown them to the radiologist, and we are actually coming up with a sort of a human-based metric. And what we've seen is that it correlates very well with the cosine similarity that we have. So human-based evaluations are very important because at the end, doctors, radiologists are the ones who will be using this technology. And if they don't really buy what you're proposing, then there is no point of working on it, right? So very good point. And we have double-checked whatever we're doing, whether it correlates well with what doctors think of the technology. And so far, it seems to be matching reasonably well. But you're right, the human evaluations should be there. Sometimes, it may generate an image. It's very hard to determine what kind of image is generated, but if you just rely on some sort of like a neural network to extract some features and correlate that with your training set, it may not really tell you a lot, but these are some of the things that we have to address, right? Perhaps there is a better metric, there is a better way to characterize replication rather than using just a cosine similarity, or maybe using self-supervised learning, as was done by the other paper. But very good point, yeah.
All right. How would you deal with volumetric images? For example, if you wanted to generate a new MRI scan for the brain, like Brett's, with a tumor, would it be possible to do this with diffusion models? What would be computer limitations?
Yes. So I think the diffusion models have advanced so much that I've shown examples with the images and videos, but they can also be used to do volumetric synthesis, right? But there the compute is significant, and if you don't have enough compute or data, maybe the replication will be even more significant in a 3D volumetric thing. But these models are generic, and you can certainly do 3D synthesis with these models. And in fact, there are many papers which do exactly that for general computer vision problems, general objects like chairs and animals and so on and so forth. Not a lot has happened in medical imaging, mainly because we don't have large-scale data sets to train such model. But you can certainly do that. And one way to deal with that problem that we've often seen, and we also do that, is rather than synthesizing volumetric sort of scenes, you do slices at a time. So you take one slice and view that as a 2D image, and now we have a very good model that can synthesize 2D images. So you do slice at a time, and you can synthesize and basically put them all together, and now you have a volumetric rendering or synthesis. That is something we've also seen in the literature. Yeah.
Right, thank you. In the case of using 30 medical images plus masks to train the diffusion model for segmentation downstream task, were the synthetic samples also checked for data replication? And if so, what was the percentage of novel and non-replicated samples out of the 1,000 generated samples?
Yes, so it was very significant. And as I mentioned before, that whenever you're dealing with very few number of images, especially in our experience, not only in biometrics, but also in medical data, what we have observed is, if the image size is in the order of like hundreds, like anywhere from 50 to 300, the replication is significant. As you increase your training size, the replication quality goes down. I mean, replication, you don't see as much replication with the increase in the number of training samples, but with a very few number of samples, it's very significant. So in our case, we did see a lot of replication, but we played the tricks that I mentioned later. And with the help of those tricks, we were able to sort of, improve the quality of generated samples. So to answer your question, it was replicating a lot, but we improved it by applying some tricks. Yeah.
Very good. Let's see, what's the next one? Does the problem of data replication exist only in unconditional models?
Oh, very good question. No, this is, we see this happening in conditional models as well. But because in conditional model, you have this conditioning that happens, and it's mainly for editing. So the replication is not as much. In fact, there are papers where, highlight exactly that point of data replication in conditional. So there was a CVPR paper last year from University of Maryland, where they took the stable diffusion, and even with the conditional sort of, diffusion, they were able to show that there is a replication happening. And what they were able to show is that you have a scene, if you use a different sort of a prompt, then it will basically keep the background and everything the same, but maybe the color of the a particular object is changed slightly. So replication there is also happening. So that is a very well understood problem. I think many people have highlighted that issue with conditional diffusion models as well, but it's not as significant compared to unconditional models.
The next question is also interesting. Are you able to distinguish a synthetic image within an unknown data set?
Unknown data set?
Yes, an unknown data set that you don't know.
Synthetic image with an unknown data set. I'm not sure if you have done that study. I mean, so far what we've done is we generate images and we correlate that with the training sample, and we see the closest matches, right? So it's like a retrieval. But if you were to generate an image and then also find the correlations with a completely other data set that you've never seen before, no, we haven't done that before. I mean, this would be important if the diffusion model makes use of internet scale data, right? But because in our applications, we do the training from scratch. So we have a diffusion model and we basically train the entire model. We don't use any pre-trained weights or anything like that. We train the model from the training set. So there may not be any correlation. But if you were to, let's say, initialize your data with a stable diffusion weights, initialize your model with a stable diffusion weights, and then maybe do fine tuning or retraining, maybe there might be correlation because stable diffusion might have seen some external data set, but that's a very interesting thought to see whether there is a correlation. But I'm not sure what that will imply. That might say that, okay, well, the generated image looks like another sample from another data set. That means your stable diffusion is somehow making use of some external data, but we never use that in our case, right? But it's something interesting. We could look into that. Thank you.
Okay, and we have currently the final question in the chat. What are possibilities to assess medical correctness of new generated synthetic data which differ from the training set accordingly to cosine similarity?
Very good question. And I think that's the interesting thing about generative AI, right? I mean, in many cases, what we have seen is that, and you can also see that from my slides, is that the generated images don't look as realistic. Maybe they look realistic to someone who doesn't work in medical imaging, but if you show those images to doctors, they're like, oh, these are bogus images. They don't really make sense. Nevertheless, because they look very similar to the images that you have in your training set, even if you use those images, what we have seen is that this is something what Lena was asking earlier, right? Maybe those artificial, not realistic images can be viewed as data augmentation. They are basically images which are not realistic, but at the same time deformed, or some weird looking images which are close to your training set. And when you use them in your training set, that overall performance is sort of increased. So you're right. I mean, many of the images are not realistic, but nevertheless, they improve the performance. That's at least what we've seen. Excuse me.
Okay,
Because we can do them as
sorry.
a data augmentation. Sorry, yeah.
Oh, no, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say that even though they're not realistic, they can be viewed as some sort of data augmentation, right? And that only helps to improve the segmentation algorithm, something like that. Yeah.
Awesome. So we had many questions indicating that there was a lot of interest. So thanks again for this interesting talk. Thanks a lot for all the participants of the seminar for listening and for asking these great questions. And I think if there's nothing else, we can end here. Thanks all of you and have a great evening.
Yeah, thank you very much. And thanks again for the invitation for this seminar. And please feel free to contact me if you want to discuss more or if you have any other questions. Thanks again.